The room smelled of wet stone and ash. Single flame trembled in a rode-iron lantern, casting jagged shadows across the carved faces of saints, silent witnesses to the rituals below. Beneath the altar, cloaked in wool and shame, knelt a girl no older than 15. Her fingers trembled against the flagstone, blood crusting beneath her nails. She had bled outside the rhythm set by the priest. Oh, she must be cleansed. Outside. Bells tolled in cold sequence, 1 for the virgin, 2 for the penitent, 3 for the damned. Her hair had been shorn that morning, a blunt blade sawing through the strands as prayers were murmured. The priest had not looked at her face. None of them ever did. She was not a soul. She was a vessel, a risk, a womb to be warned into obedience. In the choir loft, the nuns chanted psalms in voices so soft they barely rose above the dripping of condensation along the nave. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the warmth of her mother's bread oven, the scent of rosemary and barley. But here, even memory was a sin. The oil came next, burnt herbs mixed with wax and smoke, smeared across her lower belly in trembling shapes she couldn't understand. It burned. She didn't cry. Not yet. That came after. After the sermon. After the warning. After the whispered promise that if she bled again out of season, the flames would not be symbolic. It would be real. Somewhere in the rafters, a dove cooed softly. No one noticed. Not even her. The priest's voice had begun to rise, full of wrath and honey. The ritual had begun. The girl bowed her head as they all had before her. She stood barefoot in the snow, frost lacing the hem of her shift like the edge of a forgotten relic. Round her, the village gathered in silence, not in reverence, but in fear. The priest's hand gripped the holy book so tightly his knuckles were white with rage. She had bled on the wrong day. Perhaps she had whispered to the wrong boy. The reason no longer mattered. What mattered was correction. What mattered was spectacle. Behind her, the chapel loomed, squat stone beast with eyes of stained glass and teeth of scripture. Its door had been sealed with an iron bar since the last birth that ended in death. Too many daughters, the midwife had warned. Too much bleeding. Too many questions. The priest had listened. He had blamed the women. A brazier cracked with heat beside him. Within it, dried herbs hissed and flared. Sage, angelica, bitter hyssop. Symbols of cleansing. Symbols of burning. He reached into the flames and drew out a rod tipped in copper. It glowed like the sun's anger. She did not cry. She had promised her grandmother she wouldn't. Crying lets them win. The old woman had whispered through cracked lips, just before the last fever took her. Silence is our weapon. The priest raised the rod. The girl bowed, and though he claimed it was not to hurt but to purify, the scream that echoed across the frozen field betrayed the lie. The villagers turned their faces away. No one moved to stop him, not even her mother. High above the chapel, a crow circled once, then vanished into the pale sky. And still, the fire burned not in the brazier now, but along the girl's spine, where pain had been branded into obedience. Beneath the cathedral's vaulted ceiling, candlelight swam like ghosts across the stone ribs of heaven. A procession of veiled women walked in silence, their feet bare upon the chilled marble, their hands clasped in trembling prayer. One walked differently, slower, heavier, her belly round beneath a gray wool tunic.
Nice.
Fixed on the floor as if by looking up she might shatter. She was not married. That was all the priest needed. A growing body, an absent husband, and no dowry to shield her from suspicion. The church's laws were clear. A woman's body was not her own. It was God's, or it was a crime. And so she was marched through the nave like a heretic in training, her shame exposed beneath holy domes. They brought her before the bishop's chair, an enormous oak throne carved with vines and dragons. At its feet lay a silver bowl, its rim etched with the Latin word for clean. But it was not water that filled the bowl. It was vinegar, salt, and blood. From others before her, from others like her. The rite was cruel, though they named it holy. Her feet were washed, her thighs were scrubbed. A prayer was spoken over her womb, commanding the unborn child to die if it had not been conceived in wedlock. Somewhere in the crowd, a nun wept quietly. The others did not. They had learned to watch without flinching. They had learned how the church turned bodies into battlegrounds and cloisters into cages. The girl did not scream. She did not protest. She simply lowered herself to her knees and waited for the pain to pass, the child to be lost, or the flames to come next. The cell smelled of wax and rot. A single slit in the wall let in the morning light, soft and gold against the stones where her feet had bled. Chains clinked faintly as she shifted. Not ironed for, she was not a prisoner by law, but hempen ropes, tied tight around her wrists and ankles. She was being examined, not punished, not yet. The Inquisitor stood behind a veil, his voice a distant echo, distorted by linen and fear. He would not look at her, nor speak her name. To do so would admit her humanity. Instead, she was called the vessel, the accused, the daughter of Eve, the charge, knowing herbs too well, healing too many, touching too freely. Her neighbors had whispered, a woman with knowledge was always close to damnation. The church called her unclean, threat to the hierarchy of God's design. They tested her with boiling water, ladled into a brass bowl from the monastery kitchen. Her hands unwrapped, her fingers forced in. If her skin blistered, she was guilty. If it did not, she was a witch. Either way, she would not leave this place the same. She remembered the garden mugwort, rue, fever fuend, the way her grandmother's fingers moved like music through the stems. That knowledge had once saved lives. Now it condemned hers. A mouse scurried in the shadows, unnoticed. The monk beside her murmured scripture, eyes fixed on the flame dancing from the iron sconce. No one met her gaze. No one would. She lifted her blistered hand in silence, jaw clenched, eyes dry. They took this as proof, not of innocence, but of pride, the worst sin of all. The ropes tightened once more. Rain tapped the cloister's stone eaves like fingers on bone. Hush. A girl knelt in the mud, her shift soaked through, veil sagging over one eye. She was 14, a crime, resisting the marriage arranged by her confessor. A union promised in exchange for land. Her body, a coin passed from priest to noble. She had said no. Once, that was enough. The abbess stood above her, robes billowing in the wind like dark wings. Her face showed no emotion, only duty. Obedience is your salvation, she intoned. The words fell like frost. The girl did not respond. Her mouth was stitched shut not with thread, but with silence forced into her by days of fasting, of kneeling, of watching other girls vanish after the same ritual. Beneath the chapel's watchful gargoyles, 2 monks prepared the shrine. Holy water mixed with crushed nettles and holy ash, it would be poured over her chest as a sign of purity reclaimed. She would be blessed, then broken, redeemed, then reshaped. In her clenched fist, a tiny object, hidden, hard metal. Her mother's thimble, the only thing they had not taken, it pressed into her palm like a prayer. The ritual began with song, faint, dissonant, layered in sorrow. The abbess held the relic high, a bone fragment from a long-dead saint, who, they claimed, had suffered gladly. The girl did not believe it. She had seen too much suffering to believe it could be holy. When the first drops touched her skin, she did not flinch. When the chant turned to a scream, she did not look away. Her silence was not consent. It was defiance made invisible. The bells tolled once, then again. And still, the girl knelt, unyielding beneath the church's ancient gaze. In the shadow of the monastery, mist curled through the orchard like breath from unseen mouths. A woman walked barefoot between the apple trees, her shift clinging to her thighs, torn where the brambles had caught her. She had escaped, if only for a moment. Her breath trembled in the cold morning air. She did not look back. Inside, the sisters would be searching. Not for her exactly, but for the scandal she embodied. She had bled during matins, staining her robe before the Virgin's feet. The priest had called it a sign of impurity, the abbess a test. But for her, it was simply the body reminding her she still belonged to herself. And that was what frightened them. She reached the edge of the orchard, where a crumbling wall separated the cloister from the village. Beyond it, men, bread, plague, freedom. She had no illusions. The world outside did not want her either, but at least it would not claim to own her soul. She pressed her hand against the stone. Moss grew in the crevices, soft as memory. She remembered her sister's voice years ago, before the fever took her. If they make you kneel, look up anyway. The words had no place in scripture, but they lived in her like psalms. A bell rang once, then twice. Alarm, she had been seen. From the bell tower, the novice pointed, lips parted in shock. The orchard would be searched, the gates barred, shed minutes. In her other hand, she held a tiny scrap of cloth dyed red, hidden in her sleeve. Proof of her bleeding, proof of her crime, proof of her power. She ran. Not toward safety, but toward the unknown. The only direction left where she could still choose her own suffering.